You ever walk into a room and just feel like someone's tone, someone's glance, someone's silence was about you? Yeah, we've all been there, but here's the truth. Most of the time, it's not about you. It never was. See, when we take things personally, we hand over the remote control of our emotions to other people. And what we don't realize is that their actions, their moods, their judgments, they say more about them than they ever did about you. Today we're going to talk about how to stop making everything a reflection of your worth. We'll break the habit of overthinking, we'll learn how to build emotional boundaries, and most importantly, we'll take that power back. Because peace doesn't come from people treating us right. It comes from us treating ourselves right, no matter how the world moves around us. Let's get into it. When someone makes a comment, gives you a look, or reacts in a way that feels off, it's natural to assume it has something to do with you, that it must be a reflection of something you said, something you did, or even who you are. Frequency is deeply human. We're wired for connection, for validation, and for understanding how we fit into our social environments. But the trap is when we start interpreting every interaction, every silence, and every reaction as a mirror of our own worth. The truth is, not everything is about you. Most people are moving through the world preoccupied with their own thoughts, struggles, fears, and insecurities. They're dealing with deadlines, bad days, childhood wounds, financial stress, relationship problems, or simply poor sleep. And when they lash out, seem distant, or behave rudely, it's usually a reflection of their internal world, not yours. Yet, when we take it personally, we internalize their behavior as if we caused it or deserved it. This creates unnecessary emotional suffering and fuels a constant state of anxiety where we're always trying to decode the meaning behind every interaction. This belief that we are the center of everyone else's behavior is not only exhausting, it's inaccurate. It's like assuming you're the main character in someone else's movie when really they're just trying to get through their scene. That cashier who didn't smile at you, they might be struggling with grief. That friend who didn't reply to your message right away, maybe they're overwhelmed. That coworker who made a sarcastic remark in the meeting, it might have everything to do with how they see themselves and nothing to do with you at all. Taking things personally often stems from insecurity. If you're not sure of your own value, you will look for external cues to validate or reject your worth. So when someone is cold, short, or critical, it confirms your internal fear. I'm not good enough. But when you begin to understand that other people's behavior is a projection of their reality, you stop filtering everything through your own wounds. You begin to see things more clearly and more compassionately. This doesn't mean you excuse toxic behavior or ignore your feelings. It means you learn to observe rather than absorb. You become aware of your triggers, your assumptions, and your emotional reactions. You pause before reacting. You recognize the difference between what's yours plate and what belongs to someone else. When you stop assuming you are the cause of every emotional wave around you, you free yourself from unnecessary mental noise. The ego wants to believe it's always involved, always the reason, always the target. But wisdom comes in recognizing that most things that affect us aren't about us. They're happening around us. Learning to separate your identity from someone else's behavior is a form of emotional maturity. It creates space for peace, resilience, and personal growth. People are constantly projecting. Every single person you encounter is carrying a lifetime of experiences, beliefs, wounds, fears, and assumptions. When someone speaks, judges, lashes out, or dismisses you, what you're often seeing is not an accurate reflection of who you are. It's a reflection of who they are. Their actions and words are colored by their own story. And unless someone has done deep emotional work, they will unconsciously project their own internal conflicts onto others. That's why understanding projection is so important. It allows you to separate someone's behavior from your identity. When someone accuses you of being selfish, controlling, or inconsiderate without cause, it's worth asking, are they speaking from truth or are they projecting their own struggles onto you? Often, people call out in others what they are unwilling or unable to face within themselves. It's easier to blame than to reflect, easier to attack than to acknowledge one's own faults. So, a person who feels insecure might accuse others of arrogance. Someone who feels powerless might try to control. A person who doesn't respect themselves might treat others with disrespect, all while believing they're justified. This happens in relationships, at work, even in casual encounters. And when we don't understand projection, we take on those labels, those attacks, those cold silences, and we begin to question our own character. But once you learn that much of what people say or do has little to do with you and everything to do with how they see the world, you stop letting their behavior define your reality. You create distance between their emotion and your identity. You recognize that their outburst might be about something that happened years ago, something unresolved, something they never processed, and you just happen to be the nearest target. This also means you become more aware of your own projections. Emotional intelligence isn't just about seeing through others, it's about catching yourself when you're about to throw your own pain onto someone else. When you're quick to judge, when you're defensive, when you're blaming someone for how you feel, pause. Ask yourself if you're actually upset with them or if you're reliving something older, deeper, and unhealed. Projection is not just something that happens to us. It's something we all do until we become aware. Recognizing projection helps you respond instead of react. It helps you become less defensive, less wounded by other people's opinions, and more grounded in your own sense of self. You no longer feel the need to absorb every critique or decode every passive-aggressive comment. Instead, you start to see patterns. You begin to understand that people's judgments often reveal more about their inner world than yours. Clarity gives you freedom. It allows you to engage without getting entangled, to listen without feeling accused, and to observe without becoming the target. When something hits you emotionally, a rude comment, a dismissive look, a harsh tone, the first instinct is to react. It's automatic. Your heart rate spikes, your thoughts race, and your body tenses up. In that moment, you feel attacked, misunderstood, or judged, and the urge to defend yourself takes over. But emotional maturity isn't about never feeling triggered. It's about what you stew when you're triggered. The pause between stimulus and response is where real power lives. And learning to pause before reacting can change how you experience the world. The pause is a moment of awareness. It's the breath you take before you say something you'll regret. It's the second of stillness that prevents you from escalating a situation that was never about you in the first place. It's that internal checkpoint where you get to ask yourself, is this actually about me? Do I need to respond to this? What's really going on here? That split second of mindfulness can keep you from being dragged into emotional chaos that isn't yours to carry. Reacting instantly often comes from habit, from ego, from unresolved wounds. When someone pushes a button and you immediately push back, you're not in control, your emotions are. And most of the time, that reaction only intensifies the conflict. It feeds the drama. It pulls you into someone else's storm. But when you pause, even for a moment, you shift into a more conscious space. You step out of fight or flight mode and into choice. You give yourself time to see the situation for what it is, not what your emotions are telling you it might be. Pausing doesn't mean you suppress your emotions. It means you honor them without being ruled by them. It's the difference between feeling anger and becoming anger, between noticing frustration and letting it explode. When you pause, you create room to respond with intention instead of instinct. You might choose to walk away. You might choose to speak calmly, or you might choose to say nothing at all. That choice only becomes available when you're no longer being driven by your initial emotional reaction. This practice is especially powerful in close relationships. The people closest to you often know your triggers, even unintentionally. And when emotions run high, it's easy to say things you don't mean. But if you can train yourself to pause, to take a breath, to sit with the discomfort instead of unleashing it, you protect the relationship and, more importantly, you protect your own peace. You're not letting someone else dictate your emotional state. You're not handing over control of your nervous system to every opinion, mood, or judgment that comes your way. The pause also allows you to listen, really listen, not just to the other person's words, but to your own internal reactions. You start to notice the stories you tell yourself, that you're being disrespected, unloved, or rejected, and you get the chance to question whether those stories are even true. Often they're not. They're old patterns resurfacing, fueled by fear, not fact. Building emotional boundaries is one of the most essential skills for protecting your mental well-being and gaining freedom from taking things personally. Emotional boundaries are the invisible lines that separate your feelings, thoughts, and energy from those of others. Without them, everything seeps in: people's moods, their criticisms, their problems, their approval, or lack of it. You end up carrying weight that doesn't belong to you, reacting to things that shouldn't affect you, and overextending your emotional capacity just to keep the peace or avoid discomfort. When you don't have strong boundaries, you become overly responsible for other people's feelings. If someone's upset, you feel like it's your job to fix it. If someone criticizes you, you take it as truth. If someone ignores you, you assume you did something wrong. You internalize every external shift in energy as your fault, and over time, this erodes your self-esteem and creates emotional exhaustion. But when you start to build healthy boundaries, you begin to understand that not everything requires your emotional involvement. Not everything deserves a reaction. Not everyone's opinion should matter. Boundaries are not about being cold or disconnected. They're about knowing where you end and someone else begins. When you have clear emotional boundaries, you can be compassionate without becoming consumed. You can listen to someone vent without taking on their pain. You can accept feedback without letting it define you. You can remain grounded in your own truth, even when someone else disagrees with it. Boundaries allow you to protect your energy, maintain your sense of self, and respond to the world from a place of clarity rather than chaos. People with poor emotional boundaries often struggle with guilt. They feel guilty for saying no, for not reacting, for not giving in to emotional pressure. But guilt is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes guilt is just a sign that you're doing something different, something that prioritizes your mental health for a change. Building boundaries means being okay with not being understood all the time. It means being okay with disappointing people if it means staying true to yourself. It means recognizing that peace is more valuable than people-pleasing. Establishing boundaries requires self-awareness. You have to understand your triggers, your limits, and the areas where you've been giving too much of yourself away. It means learning to say, this is not mine to carry, or I won't let this affect how I feel about myself. And sometimes it means walking away from conversations, relationships, or environments that repeatedly disrespect your emotional space. It's not selfish, it's self-preserving. It's self-preserving. Once you begin to live with boundaries, you start to feel more in control. You're no longer a sponge for everyone else's negativity. You no longer feel obligated to explain yourself constantly or defend your decisions to people who aren't entitled to them. You begin to recognize that your inner world is yours to protect, and not everyone deserves access to it. Detaching from the need for approval is one of the most liberating decisions you can make for your mental and emotional health. From a young age, many of us are conditioned to seek validation from parents, teachers, friends, and eventually from society at large. We're taught, often unconsciously, that our worth is tied to how others see us, that being accepted, liked, or praised equals being enough. But when your sense of value depends on someone else's opinion, you're handing over the reins of your self-esteem, to people who often don't even know your full story, your intentions, or your truth. Living in constant pursuit of approval creates anxiety, self-doubt, and a deep fear of rejection. You become hyper-aware of how you're perceived, editing yourself to fit expectations, playing roles just to avoid conflict or disapproval. You end up saying yes when you want to say no, staying quiet when you should speak, and over-explaining your actions just to avoid judgment. Slowly, you lose connection with who you really are because you're too busy performing for others. The need for approval becomes a trap, a cycle that keeps you stuck in inauthenticity. But the reality is, no matter how good, kind, or accomplished you are, there will always be people who misunderstand you, criticize you, or simply don't resonate with you. Their opinion isn't a measure of your value. It's a reflection of their perspective, shaped by their own beliefs, fears, and biases. When you realize this, you begin to detach. You stop looking outward for answers about who you are. You start turning inward. You ask yourself, do I respect my choices? Am I proud of who I'm becoming? Does this align with my values? Detachment doesn't mean you become arrogant or stop caring about others altogether. It means you stop tying your identity to their reaction. You can care about people and still not need their approval. You can be open to feedback and still trust your own judgment. You can accept criticism without letting it dismantle your confidence. Detachment is about emotional sovereignty, the ability to hold your center regardless of what others think. This level of detachment creates peace. You no longer chase validation like a reward. You no longer fear disapproval as a punishment. You operate from self-trust, not from a desperate need to be accepted. And when you're not driven by approval, you make decisions that are more authentic, more courageous, and more aligned with who you really are. You stop overthinking every interaction, wondering if you said the right thing or if someone's silence means they're upset with you. Letting go of the need for approval also shifts your relationships. You attract people who value your honesty, not just your compliance. You create space for deeper, more meaningful connections because you're showing up as your real self, not a version of yourself crafted to avoid rejection. Approval becomes a bonus, not a requirement. Respect becomes mutual, not a transaction. And your confidence begins to grow, not because others say you're enough, but because you've decided you are. Letting go is a skill, one that most people aren't taught, but everyone needs. When someone says something hurtful, when a situation doesn't go the way you hoped, when you feel overlooked, rejected, or misunderstood, the mind tends to hold on to it. You replay the moment, analyze every word, wonder what you could have done differently. It becomes a loop, constant, draining, and quietly damaging. The longer you hold on to it, the heavier it becomes. What started as a single moment turns into a narrative, and that narrative begins to shape how you see yourself and the world. Training yourself to let go doesn't mean pretending something didn't hurt. It means feeling it, understanding it, and then choosing not to carry it any longer than necessary. It's the recognition that holding on to offense, bitterness, or embarrassment doesn't protect you. It poisons you. The more you dwell, the more power you give to the person or the situation that hurt you, and often they've already moved on. You're the one stuck with the weight, stuck with the story, stuck with the emotion that should have passed through but instead took root. Letting go is about emotional hygiene. Just like you wouldn't walk around all day in dirty clothes, you shouldn't carry emotional debris from every negative interaction. It clogs your peace. It clouds your thinking. It keeps you reactive and insecure. But when you learn to release, truly release, you create space. Space for clarity, for calm, and for better things to come into your life. The energy you were using to replay that moment can now be used to rebuild your confidence or redirect your focus. It also teaches you how to stop seeking closure from people who will never give it to you. Not everyone who hurt you will apologize. Not every situation will make sense in hindsight. Sometimes you let go not because it's all resolved, but because it's no longer worth the mental rent it's taking up. You reclaim your peace by deciding that your inner world is too important to keep polluted by someone else's words or actions. Letting go requires self-awareness. You have to notice when you're starting to spiral, when a thought becomes obsessive, when your mood is being hijacked by something that already happened. And in that moment, you remind yourself that you have a choice. You don't have to keep revisiting that pain. You don't have to keep building a case for your hurt. You can acknowledge what happened and still choose to move forward. That's not weakness, it's strength. It's emotional discipline. This isn't a one-time decision, it's a practice. Some days you'll find it easier than others. Some moments will feel impossible to release. But with time, you start to build emotional muscles. You begin to trust yourself to handle discomfort without clinging to it. You recognize that peace is not the absence of pain. It's the ability to stop dragging it with you. The more you practice letting go, the less reactive you become. The less reactive you are, the more emotionally bulletproof you grow.